Everyone, I want to thank you for coming. Good morning. I am Russ Hovland, your Chief Building Official. So again, thanks for coming this morning. Appreciate it. I wanted to do a quick rundown of the agenda and introductions. So first part of the class, we will be going through local amendments. That'll be about an hour and a half. The second section of the training today will be with Brad Smith, Energy Code amendments and code changes to the Energy Code. And be followed with significant changes to the actual code as written, done by Sarah Carter, Senior Plans Examiner. And then we will have Shar and Casey following up in the end with contractor licensing information. So this is what this class is and is not. So I wanted to give you a quick rundown because this is a local amendment class and changes to those local amendments. It's an overview of the actual changes to the 2018 codes as written. And then there's contractor licensing information. And what you're going to see on the screen up here is when we have the local amendment shown, which will be the first hour and a half, you'll see the changes in red text. So anything that we've changed, I've done in red, and that's a lot of the changes that we've had for many years. And then anything that we've made recent changes to, I've highlighted in yellow. So that's the kind of the format. So you'll see again highlighted in yellow will be changes we just made to the 2018 adopted codes. So where we have duplicate code sections, for example, where we have we're in the IRC and there's fuel gas changes to gas piping. Many of those changes are also made in the fuel gas code, which will apply to multifamily and commercial as well. We will identify when that's the case and only talk about it once. So what I wanted to be clear on in this class is this is not a building code class. We're not going to be going through all the sections of code because we'd be here all year if we tried to do that. So again, we're just going over local amendments and then significant changes to the codes. So the other thing is this is not a forum to complain about codes, and the only reason I say that is because we just don't have time. We have a very full agenda, so if you guys have questions, that's fine. We'll try and get them answered as quickly as we can, and then get on with the presentation. What we're going to do is I want you to raise your hand if you have a question. We'll have a couple of mics, and with staff walking around with the mics, and they will walk to you. You can ask your question. We'll get those questions answered as quickly as we can. If we can't get a question answered, then we will take down your information and contact you over the next week with that answer. Okay, well, we're going to dive right in to the local amendments now. So the first section that we're going to go through is the IBC, so 2018 IBC. So we have the first section, which is going to be 105.2, and that is work exempt from a permit. So many of these are carryover amendments we've had for many years. We have the storage shed section, and that is number 1, 120 square feet, 8 feet tall. We've had that for many years. It needs to be 3 feet from the property line to avoid needing a permit. Okay. Fence 6 feet tall, max to avoid a permit. We've also had that for many years. And then as you see the remaining items there that are not changed, oil derricks, retaining walls, and some of those are, again, carryover that we've had for many years. One change that we made in this section, work exempt from a permit, was the shade cloth structure hoop houses. We added that in. And moving on down the list here, we have playground equipment. We've had that, again, carryover amendment. And then we did make a change to windows, window awnings, window replacement. So the change that we made here was when you are going to be replacing windows size for size, you don't need a permit. However, we made a change in the code for historical preservation that they must be notified if the structure is more than 50 years old. Now, when you're doing this, when you're going to be making a change to a structure that's more than 50 years old regarding windows, all you have to do is come into Building Services and request to meet with Historical. and they will do so at the counter with you. There's no fee for that. You can do that at the counter at that time, and so there won't be a separate permit process for that. That way you can get the question answered quickly and then move on with the project. Again, more carryover amendments are with decks not exceeding 200 square feet, not more than 30 inches. Again, local amendment we've had for a long time. That is the category where you do not need a permit for that type of deck. Roof repair, not more than 100 square feet, so 1 square carryover again. Siding replacement, and again, we added the historical requirement here. If you're going to be replacing siding older than 50 years old, again, we just need to have you talk with historical preservation on that. Again, it should be a quick meeting at the permit counter. Okay, so that was section 105.2. Okay, so we made a change. 105.2 actually is a carryover. We've deleted the electrical, gas, mechanical, and plumbing sections you don't need a permit for, and that's carryover we've had for many years. So we do require a permit for when you're doing that type of work. The second section, 105.21, that is a new section that we added this year. So what this is, an emergency repair permit. So this allows us during a disaster, emergency type situation, that allows me to issue a free building permit to, for example, a homeowner that needs to shore up, a certain part of the structure so that they can continue to occupy the home. So that will allow them to get the permit, shore it up. We can go in and do a quick inspection and make sure that the structure is safe and able to occupy. Then that allows them to make changes or plan for a permanent, more normal permit in the future to actually make the permanent repairs to the structure. Now, this was recommended by the county after they had the fires and the floods in the county, and they did not have a means to do this, and they recommended that we implement this, and we thought that was a good idea, so this is new. Okay, so time limitation on an application. This is again a carryover amendment, 180 days. The permit application window, 180 days. We've had that for a while. We did several code cycles ago add a requirement that the exterior part of the project must be done within 24 months of permit issuance. This was in response to citizens that were complaining that the exterior of our project was not getting done in time, and they thought that it was not looking the way it should in their neighborhood, and that was a code change we made a couple code cycles ago. So work commencing before permit, again, this is a carryover amendment. So the normal double fee of a permit is the normal fee, the normal fine for doing work without a permit. So it would be the same amount as the actual permit fee. And then the code goes on to say that no less than $50 and no more than $1,000. And if you need more details on that, I can get you that in our final ordinance version if anybody needs more information on that. Okay, so next session, 310.4.1. This is a change. So daycare facilities within a dwelling. So this is in response to multiple committees and groups in the area that have concern about in-home daycares. There's a shortage of those, and the concern in the code was that we require those to be fire sprinkled. And the reality there is that many businesses, many in-home daycares would simply not be able to afford that sprinkling, and it would then lower the amount of available daycare and thus causing even bigger problem with shortage of daycares. So what we did is we got with Poudre Fire Authority and analyzed what in the structure is changing. Really not much. Is the occupant load going up significantly? And the answer is no. You're limited to five people receiving care, and therefore fire department said no. There's really no change in the way we would fight that fire, no change in the risk, and therefore we removed the sprinkler requirement. Okay, 502.2, premise identification, another carryover. Just make sure that you have your permit number and address identified on the project. 707.310 and 903. So this is in response to our fire containment table that we have had for many years. So as most of you probably know, when it comes to multifamily and commercial, we have a 5,000 square foot fire containment rule. So essentially what that's saying is you hit that threshold, you need to either contain with a 1 hour wall, 1 hour separation if you have a larger than 5,000 square feet, or you need to sprinkle the building. So there was confusion in the past because in the UBC we had a separate table, and then in the IBC they actually have a section 903, that covers when you have to sprinkle, but those square footages were different. To give you an example, in an office area it was, I think, 12,000 square feet. Our fire containment was 5,000 square feet, so there was confusion there. This cleans that up, and what we did is amended those sections in 903 to say, in most cases, 5,000 square feet. So this cleans that up and makes it easier to read. We also changed the fire area table to say 1 hour fire containment wall, instead of, in many cases, they were 2, 3, and 4 hour walls, but they were much larger square footages. So the goal here is that, again, we'll get down to smaller 5,000 square foot containment areas and a 1 hour wall. So you might have, for example, 3 fire containment areas with 1 hour walls instead of one large area. Okay, 90211, fire pump room access. So this is a change. We were concerned that, and the fire department brought this up in our committee meeting, that there's no requirement for the size of the door on the fire pump room, and there's pretty big equipment that goes into some of the fire pump assemblies, and so they asked for a minimum size, and that would be either 32 inches or as wide as the largest piece of equipment for replacement. Okay, 903.3. So this is the fire sprinkler, residential sprinkler system requirement. So this is a carryover we've had for many years. So this was derived out of concern from the Penny Flats fire and some other fires that we had, where we had multifamily buildings that were sprinkled with a 13R system, and the attics were not sprinkled, and there are certain other interstitial areas that are not required to be sprinkled, and we did have fire spread in those areas. And so what we did several code cycles ago is say that for a Group R dwelling in the IBC, so multifamily, you have to do a full 13 sprinkler system. But what we did is we had to add an exception in here that said you're limited to a smaller size building, multifamily building, if you want to do a 13R. So that'd be 6 units or 12 units with a 2-hour firewall in the middle. And then you have your fire barriers between dwelling units. So, and that is a carryover from the last code cycle. 907.210. So this is, again, another carryover for smoke alarms. Smoke alarms required when you're adding any bedrooms to the project, or creating a new bedroom with an addition, that type of project, then you need to add your smoke alarms in. And again, that's a carryover amendment. 1009.6, area of refuge. Another carryover. We do not require an area of refuge in buildings that are not more than 4 stories. That has worked out relatively well. Poudre Fire Authority did not see the need for that. Area of refuge is typically when you'd have in a stair tower. You would have an area outside a stair tower for fire department to be able to help assist someone, for example, in a wheelchair out of the building. In taller buildings, fire department thought that was more appropriate, so that's a carryover amendment. And then following up to that same issue was two-way communication, which was required at area of refuge. And two-way communication is a bit of a costly install for new construction, and so what we did is added on that when you're not required to have that area of refuge, then you don't have to have the two-way communication. Okay, so 10.10.1.5, floor elevation. So we added a section in here. Let's see, paragraph to require exterior steps, slabs, walks, decks at exterior door landings or exterior stairs shall be adequately and permanently secured in place by approved methods to prevent landings or stairs from being undermined or displaced. Carryover amendment we've had for a long time. This was in response to a lot of complaints we had many years ago about especially front stoops separating from buildings. We added this amendment to take care of that, and that has so far worked relatively well. 1015.8, window awnings and openings. So for multifamily dwellings and R3 dwellings under the IBC, when you have a window sill with an operable window that is less than, and the amendment we made was 24 inches. So the reason we did this is because the IRC for houses allows that window sill to be 24 inches before you need a guard, fall protection. There was a concern by the architects, designers in the area that we can have these large windows in single family, but we can't in multifamily. And so we amended this. There's a carryover a couple of code cycles ago. We amended this to be consistent with the IRC. So both codes are now 24-inch sill height before you need a guard. So 1015.9, below grade openings. So this is another carryover we've had for many years. This is when we have those window wells and large areas that fall more than 30 inches, you need a guard or a barrier or a cover. The change we made here was it was a little bit of a complicated code section that we had in there prior to this code cycle. And so what we did is simplify it and made it simple and just said, hey, you need guards or covers. And so it was an attempt to simplify that code section. Section 1030.1, emergency escape and rescue openings, not required in basements with a ceiling height of less than 72 inches. So the reason we made this change was we have a threshold for 72 inches when you're going to finish any kind of an area in a basement anyway. So what we're trying to do here is establish that and be consistent with, if you're going to finish that area and have it as habitable, we want at least 72 inches. And so therefore require that egress window whenever you have that, so that in the future when there is a basement finish, then at least that they have the required height and the required egress window. The second part of this in the IBC is IBC allows you to not provide egress windows when you have a sprinkled building and 2 exits. So the concern by building services and the fire department here was it allowed any type of sprinkler system. And it allowed a 13D, 13R, which we really didn't want. If we're going to allow no egress windows in bedrooms, we want a full 13 commercial sprinkler system. So that was the amendment, to go ahead and change this to require the full 13 system if you're going to not provide egress windows. Okay, 1202.4. Deleted underfloor ventilation to keep code as written. Okay, so this is one of the things that we did here on this code cycle is we have deleted amendments that we thought we no longer needed or were provided in the code as written. So we were careful to do that this time, and we did delete several amendments. This is an example of that. 1202.4 was a underfloor ventilation section that we've had for many years since 2005. That amendment was several pages long. The code as written has that, and so we just deleted that entire amendment, and now we'll use the code as written. 1202.45, under below grade floors. So this is where you have for example, where you have a wood floor in a basement or a slab, where you have a structural slab and you have space, you have a cavity under that, a crawl space under that floor. We want ventilation in there. The problem was that there's not a good prescriptive method in doing that. So what we did is we said we want a professional engineer to design that system, and that's a carryover from the last couple code cycles. So 1210, radon resistant construction. So for dwellings, R2, R3, R4, occupancies, and again this is in the IBC, and in institutional, so for I1 and I2 nursing homes, we are requiring radon systems, and that's a carryover. We've been requiring radon systems anytime you have a dwelling for many years. The change here is that we are referring to the 2018 IRC Appendix F for radon. That's new. What we did is we looked at our roughly 4 pages of local amendment that we've had since 2005, and we compared that to the IRC Appendix F as written, and they were very similar. So what we did is we took the two, we made a few changes that we'll cover later in that Appendix F, and we are adopting that. So that, again, that is an attempt to get rid of a local amendment that we don't need and simplify our amendment package. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. 1204.14, vinyl and polypropylene siding. This is again a carryover, so we allow the vinyl siding to be installed when it is over a 1-hour assembly. So this is in response to several fires that we had that had vinyl siding on the exterior. And in response to that, we do want that to be over a 1-hour assembly. 1404.13, fenestration, again a carryover amendment. So for new doors and windows in new construction, we do want those to be installed to meet the AMA standards. We do have some of those standards available at Building Services if you want for more information there. And that is in the IRC also, so that's regarding any new building, including new houses. 1502.1, all buildings shall have a controlled method of roof drainage to the ground, surface at least 5 feet away from the foundation. So again, this is a carryover amendment we've had for many years. We want to make sure we get that water drainage away from the structure, and there's different methods in doing that. If you want to use a chain to a splash block, that's fine. I've had questions about that. As long as you having a method to provide that, you can show us how you're going to do that. And if you are not sure, you can always come to Building Services and ask us to review that, and we can do that. So 1608.2 is our establishment of our roof snow load. We've had 30 PSF for many years. That has not changed. I shouldn't have put that in red, sorry. Or actually it isn't red because that's our local amendment. So that is the current requirement, 30 PSF, again carryover. And then the change would be in the following category, 1609.3, which is our wind load. So I know we've changed this many times. Sorry for having to keep track of all that, but we did change it again. So we met in depth on this issue about what would be the right wind load, and as a committee, we came up with 140 miles per hour exposure B wind load for risk category 2 buildings, which is most types of buildings. And what we did here is we took the SEAC study, which is the Structural Engineers Association of Colorado. We took that study, which is a very in-depth wind study just for the Front Range. And they have different wind loads for different parts of town. So what we did is we said, well, let's just establish one wind load, 140, which will comply with anywhere you meet in the city. Or, as an alternate, you can use the SEAC study. So what that allows you to do is, for example, if you're building structures or homes on the east side of town or east of I-25, and we do have some areas over there that are in the city, you can design for 115 mile per hour wind load. So if you want to do that, you have that option. Okay, 1804.4, final grading. So for final grading adjacent to the foundation, we have amended soil requirements. So you want to make sure that you take care that there is not going to be any undermining or significant settlement or displacement. So again, that's a amendment that we've had for many years, so that is a carryover. 2902.14. Touch-free toilet facilities. So this is another carryover amendment we've had for many years. Toilet facilities installed for occupancy associated with food prep or food service. So typically this affects restaurants. And what this is we want restaurants that have multiple fixture restrooms to be touch-free. So we want the door to be touch-free, the faucet, and the towel dispenser. The exception is for single-user restrooms. We allow that door to swing in, and therefore that door does not have to be touch-free. But we still want the faucet and the towel dispenser to be touch-free. Now, there is various ways to achieve this. We have had designs where they really wanted the door to swing in, and you can put those on an automatic opener. And we've even had some openers that you can use your foot on the door, and we've approved some of those as well. 29022, separate facilities. So this is a requirement that we've had to carry over the last couple code cycles that allows you to meet your fixture count, so the number of required toilets, with a multiple unisex facilities instead of men's and women's facilities. So we've had this it's a carryover we've had for years, and there are some designers and there are some customers that want to use multiple unisex single-user restrooms, and that's fine. All we're saying here is that you can do that. If you want to do multiple unisex in lieu of men's and women's, you can certainly do that to meet your fixture count. And the interesting part about this code section is that in the 2021 code, there may be a change that actually requires gender-neutral restrooms. That is, I'm hearing that that's coming. There's nothing definitive on that yet, so just be looking for that probably in the future. We'll see if that does change when we start doing the 2021 code adoption in a couple years. We'll see what happens. Okay, 2902.3 access. The route to public toilet facilities shall not pass through kitchens or storage rooms. So that's been in the code for many years. What we added was an amendment that said that you have to provide a clear path to that restroom so that the public can get there without being escorted. So an example of this is we have many small tenant finishes that are done in the city, and what we don't want is the business only providing a employee restroom in the back through a storage area. That becomes problematic. We have gotten many complaints about that over the years, and so we do want a restroom that is for everyone in the facility, including customers. So we want that restroom to be accessed by everyone in the building. Okay, and now I'm going to bring up Jonathan Nagel, and he is going to talk about construction waste recycling. Jonathan?
Thank you, Russ. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Nagel. I'm an environmental compliance specialist with the City of Fort Collins, and I'm here to give Russ a break from speaking and also to talk trash to you guys. Sorry, I recycle that joke a lot, so trying to lighten the mood a little bit. So a lot of these are unchanged from prior years, but we have had some minor tweaks. One of those being they are now identical in the IBC and IRC of the types of projects that have to follow these requirements and the types of materials that have to be recycled. So for any remodels or additions over 2,500 square feet and all new construction, the following materials must be recycled: aggregates, that being the asphalt, concrete, masonry, wood, metal, and cardboard. For demolitions, this is all demolitions, but we did this year exclude interior-only demolitions that are under 1,000 square feet. This was a lot because of the feedback we heard from you guys. It was a lot of hassle to fill out this paperwork and do this for very little material diversion. So those small interior-only demolitions are now excluded from the demolition recycling requirements. Otherwise, for any other demolition, those same aggregate materials, metal, are required to be recycled, and if possible, if there is wood that's unpainted, untreated, or there are any materials that can be reused, if there's cabinetry, doors, or anything, especially if these are older structures, a lot of those have a lot of value for reuse. One entirely new section we had this year in the IBC is that last one you'll see, 3602.1.2, which is talking about chutes. So it seemed like 5 years ago we never saw chutes being built in buildings in Fort Collins, and now they're starting to become the norm, especially when we're looking at especially student-oriented multifamily. So we also did add this requirement to our land use code, so we are trying to catch it during that plan review. But just if you are installing a trash chute, realize you must also install a recycling chute of the same size or larger immediately adjacent to it. We've just found very challenging for residents who actually want to recycle. If you're saying, hey, you can throw all your trash down this chute that's a couple doors down from your unit, or you have to go down 5 stories to recycle. You know what would happen. So the flip side of this waste recycling requirements is the tracking for it. Most of you are familiar with that form I have the photo of up there. When we did update the code section, I did release a new form. There are no longer a different version for demos or for new construction. It's now just one form, and it just has a checkbox for the type of projects you guys are doing at the top of it. All the same types of projects that are required to recycle are required to fill out this plan. This is just so we can track, A, the success of this program, your guys' compliance with it, and just how many materials we're actually diverting. The reason we kind of care about this, every year 30 to 40% of what's thrown away from Fort Collins is from construction and demolition. I don't know if a single other industry can claim that big a portion of the pie. So that's kind of why we care. The one change that we had this year with this waste tracking is that now all roofing permits are required to submit a final waste management plan. We have noticed that asphalt shingles are really quickly filling up our landfill. On bad hail years, it can be up to 12% of our waste stream based on our modeling. So we're really just trying to get better numbers on that. And Russ will probably talk about in a little bit, we did add a requirement for class 4 impact resistant shingles to be used. So this will also kind of help us track the success of that. So just be aware if you guys are doing any roofing projects that you do need to fill out one of these plans. It's only at the end of the project. It's not like a demo or new construction where you have to fill it out at the beginning and end. It's only that final submittal for re-roofs. And you do need to keep that landfill disposal ticket that says the total weight you disposed of. So just be aware of that. And that is all I have. I have my contact information up there. If you guys do have any questions or you're struggling with this on your site, always happy to come out, meet with you guys, chat about this recycling. Really want to make it as successful and hopefully as easy as we can on all of you. So that is mine, and I'll pass it back to Russ.
Morning, Russ. These are both on your section. We talked about the certification on the windows being AAMA. Does it also the certification we got through the city, is that still good?
Yes, that is fine. And if anybody needs to be approved to do the window and door installation, if you're not AMA certified, you can come watch a video down at Building Services, and then that will approve you to do those installs.
Okay. And then the touch-free use stuff, and you said for a single use, would a single use be like a handicap stall, or are unisex and locked from the outside? Or
Yeah, so single user is always just a restroom that has a toilet and a lav. So that's all allowed for a single user. That way the person can go into that room, lock the door, and use the facility. So anytime you have a multi-fixture restroom, so you have one toilet and a urinal, for example, that is a multi-user restroom, and so that's going to be a men's room or a women's room, and then you're going to have requirements for a touch-free for those facilities.
All right, well, that's it.
Yeah, at the beginning, I think it said note 17, work valued less than $500 did not need was that a permit for that?
Yeah, correct. If you're not doing any mechanical, electrical, plumbing, or structural work, and it's less than $500, then no permit required for that work.
Okay, and that was 105.2.
Correct.
Stated that. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Who recycles asphalt roofs composition? Is there a place that those can be taken?
So asphalt shingles are not recyclable in Colorado. There was attempts in prior years to grind them up and use them as road base. CDOT has pretty strict regulations on that usage. All of those shingles had to be tested for asbestos before they'd allow that use, and they would only allow up to 5% of the road mixture to be from reclaimed shingles. Because of that, the recyclers who were attempting to do this built up huge stockpiles and weren't really able to move the product. So CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, stepped in and said, we no longer consider these recyclable and they must be landfilled. So that was kind of our reasoning behind the class 4 and the waste tracking for it, is just to hopefully have higher quality shingles that are surviving hailstorms, so we're wasting less of it, and then just making sure that these materials are going to an appropriate facility.
Well, due in part to all of the asbestos testing requirements nowadays, is there any way to reach out to them and say, hey, look, we're getting all this stuff tested nowadays. Would you reconsider doing that?
Yeah, and so there are conversations happening at the state level, and obviously we're pushing for that, and a lot of other municipalities are, because it's not, Colorado has some of the most intense and frequent hailstorms in the country, so all of our landfills across the Front Range especially are just getting hammered with all of these shingles. So there's definitely a lot of conversations happening. There's also starting to be really some testing of other ways to recycle asphalt shingles, seeing if they can actually extract the minerals from them, the oil content, pull the aggregate out. So there are looking at other methods that could work too.
Okay, so 3603, excuse me, indoor air quality, HVAC system protected from debris during construction, and then flush out required 14 days. So again, this is a carryover amendment from 2012. And the building flush out piece, you can occupy the building. So that was a concern many years ago about, wow, do we have to finish a building and have it empty for 2 weeks? And no, there was too much concern with occupants wanting to occupy that building right away. So you can actually run the HVAC system with the building occupied at a level at which it can be flushed out during occupancy. 3603.2, low VOC. Again, a carryover amendment since 2012 as well. In new construction, covering site applied finishes, sealants, adhesives, floor covering, resilient flooring, carpeting, that does need to be low VOC, and that applies to the IRC as well, so for houses as well. 3603.31, exterior sound transmission. So this is a requirement that when you have a assembly occupancy, educational occupancy, a dwelling, any dwelling occupancy, and usually it affects multifamily the most, and any B occupancy that is has educational purposes. So if you had adult college, for example, when you're within 500 feet to a highway, 250 feet of a 4-lane road, or 1,000 feet within an active railway, you must provide sound-resistant exterior walls that meet an STC rating of 39. So the way that has been, they've been complying with this is, especially for multifamily, is it's a composite rating. So when we actually have a spreadsheet that we can hand out to anyone, and designers ask for this all the time, that you actually will put in the square area of the area of the wall, put in the STC ratings and the area of your windows and doors, and that gives you a composite rating. And if it meets the 39, then you meet that requirement. So that has been actually well received by tenants, by occupants of multifamily buildings. They have commented to me that that's actually, now that we have so many buildings being built close to the railway, that has actually made a big difference to them. Okay, exterior lighting. So 3603.3. Another carryover again for building mounted lighting. Has to meet the dark sky requirements or be fixture seal of approval for dark sky. The intent here is to make sure that the light can't be seen from the property line. So the light must be shielded or pointed down so that you can't see it from the perimeter of the property. So this applies to IRC as well. So it's applying to single family also. This has been a carryover, and this has been one that it's been a little bit controversial in the past because of security reasons. However, this has been well received. As of late, we've received a lot of comments that this is making a difference, especially in newer neighborhoods. Next section, 3604.1, building commissioning. Excuse me. So this is required for larger buildings, new buildings where you have 15,000 square feet or more. You have to provide a commissioning report is required for CO. Now, we don't require this for multifamily, and here's why. For multifamily, there are so many other requirements in our code that requires that you have a HVAC test and balance. You have to have typically a separate panel board for each dwelling. You have to have ventilation, mechanical ventilation. So there are so many things elsewhere in the code that you have to provide that commissioning would also require. Therefore, we didn't want to double the requirements essentially, and so for multifamily, we don't require the commissioning, but for non-multifamily, 15,000 square feet or more, commissioning is required. And the submittal that we want on that is the executive summary, is what we want on the report, because many of these commissioning reports, as a lot of you know, they can be hundreds of pages. So we really just want the executive summary. Okay, so now we're moving on to the IRC, to the 2018 IRC. So, reminder, IRC governs single-family detached homes, property line townhomes, and duplexes. Okay, so R302.2. So this is a carryover amendment that does require the fire sprinkler system in new townhomes. So property line townhomes, we do require that they be sprinkled. Those have to be sprinkled to a P2904 or 13D sprinkler system. And that is, P2904 is your prescriptive method of doing that, located right in the IRC code itself. That is, again, that's a carryover. Excuse me, and we've been doing that for a number of years now. Through R302.2, continuity. So this was a carryover, and what we're asking for here is that when you're building townhomes, and you are, for example, you might have two townhomes next to each other that have a front porch, for example, and that front porch extends to both dwellings. What we don't want is that front porch attic to be open to each other, and therefore the spread of fire can potentially happen because you have a cavity that's open to both dwellings. And so this requirement basically just says you have to protect at the property line for those cavities out to that furthest extension. So you'd have a double 1 hour protection in those types of spaces.
I'm just thinking about your example there. If you have a front porch that's hard to split in half because it's open, can you just wall it off from the actual units?
Yes, you could do that. Yep. Okay, moving on, R302.3. So two-family dwellings. So this is where our duplex comes in, and we require sprinkling of the duplex as well. So it's the same requirement as property line townhomes. Again, we required sprinkling of duplexes for a number of years now. Also regarding that, we have continued our requirement that we do not require single-family detached homes to be sprinkled. So right now we have maintained that in the code, and we'll be, again, in a couple years, we'll be having another conversation about that, and I'm sure Peter Fire Authority is going to want to weigh in on that.
With the single family, if we do option to sprinkler for the unfinished basement fire protection of the floor system, is there a governing set of rules or code you want us to follow there? Because there's been discussion on what we should do, what we shouldn't do.
So if this is your question is if you just have an unfinished basement and you're protecting the I-joist.
Yep, instead of spraying it or finishing it.
Right. So you do have the option to sprinkle that, right, instead of the drywall or an alternate. And so if you do have I-joist and you want to sprinkle, we do have a prescriptive method, if you will, that we allow administratively. We allow for that to do that, and basically that allows you to put a few heads down there that will meet the square footage per head of that requirement, and allow you to have the plumber do that install and meet that requirement.
Is there anything for drops and supports that we can follow?
I guess I'm not following your question.
If we have to drop a sprinkler head to get around a beam for coverage or anything like that, is there anything we can follow there?
Yeah, we would use the P2904 section for that. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so the question was, when we have a crawl space and you have I-joist again, do you have to sprinkle that? So this has gone back and forth. There's been some confusion about this. So whenever you have a crawl space that has I-joist and there is no fuel-fired equipment in the crawl, and the crawl is not designed for storage. So the crawl space does not have a concrete floor, and the crawl has the minimum size hatch, then we do not require you sprinkle it. Now, a lot of people are putting larger hatches there, and if the hatch is larger than normal and larger than the ability to replace the largest appliance, then we are requiring that you sprinkle that. So if you do, so for example, if you do have a crawl and you have an appliance down there and you have the minimum size hatch and you put one sprinkler head over the appliance, then you don't have to sprinkle the remaining part of the crawl. So I know that there's a little bit of confusion there, and I do have a policy that I'm writing up about this to clarify this, and if anybody wants that, I'd be happy to email it to you. Okay, R311.7, so this is again a carryover for a spiral stair. So this, reason we did this is that the narrow 26-inch spiral stair, there was concern about using this for other areas other than just inside a dwelling, and so we clarified and added that it has to be within a dwelling unit. You can use that spiral. 311.75, stair riser heights. So this is a carryover we've had for many years. we added a minimum riser height of 4 inches. And the reason we did that is we didn't want any trippers out there. So you get below 4 inches and it's a tripper. So again, that's a local amendment we've had for a while. So your risers are always 7 3/4 and 4 inch, 7 3/4 max, 4 inches minimum. And again, we're talking IRC now, so we're into single family. R314.4 interconnection. So smoke alarms, interconnection. This was a change we just made, and the concern here was that the code is requiring hardwire connection for almost everything. And what we didn't want is everybody to have to do the hardwiring and break open drywall. And so we added back in the previous requirement previous to the 2018 that does allow you to do battery operated smoke alarms when you have construction that you're going to have to expose. So again, that's a new amendment. R315.2 CO alarms. Again, a carryover for carbon monoxide alarm. Whenever you're doing an alteration that you need a permit for, adding sleeping room, creating a new sleeping room in an addition, you always have to add carbon monoxide alarms. And those have to be within 15 feet of the bedrooms. So if you have a 2-story home, bedrooms on both floors, you'd have two CO alarms, one within 15 feet of the bedrooms. R326 amendment is deleted, so this is the pool barrier requirement. So there's been a little bit of confusion on this one. So a number of code cycles ago, the IRC and the IBC removed the pool barrier requirement and suction entrapment requirements, and they put them in a separate code, a new created code called the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. We didn't want to adopt that. We weren't prepared to adopt that a couple of code cycles ago. So what we did is we took all the barrier requirements that used to be in the code, and we put them back into the code as a local amendment. That made the amendments lengthy because there's multiple pages of swimming pool barrier requirements, and it added a little bit of confusion because most jurisdictions are going to this code and adopting this swimming pool code. So what we decided to do here is take all those amendments out of the IRC and the IBC and then adopt that new swimming pool code. So I know it's a funny name for a code book. If you guys ever need requirements from that code book, you feel free to come on down to Building Services and we'll go over those with you. I don't expect everybody to go out and buy another code book. R4011, foundations. So this requires foundations on new buildings be designed by a local licensed architect or engineer, except for non-habitable detached accessory structures. So again, this is a carryover we've had for many years. We've always required engineered foundations for new residential structures. The exception here is when you're doing a large shed that you need a permit for, doing a detached garage, then you can use the prescriptive Chapter 4 requirements for that if you like. Okay, R4015, placement of backfill. Excavation outside foundation shall be backfilled with soil free of organic material or construction debris. So this is our amended soil requirement that we've had for many years. We just want to make sure that there's no problem with that soil that is up against the structure. R405.1, concrete masonry foundation. So this is the perimeter drain requirement. So wherever you have a space that, for example, would be a basement type height of space, then you do need to have perimeter drain, and you do have to terminate that to a daylight or sump pit. So we've had that for many years, and we're bringing that forward again this year. R408.1, underfloor ventilation. Underfloor ventilation shall be provided per R408.3. So what we did here, the change we made here is because we deleted our previous underfloor ventilation and went to straight code, there's another section in here that talks about, in this section it talks about the ability to do a cold crawl, vented crawl. Our energy code, that is in conflict with our energy code. So what we did here is we said, we don't really want you doing that. We want you to do a warm crawl, warm insulated unvented crawl, which is R408.3. So what we did here is we don't want people using R408.2 unless you absolutely have to due to reasons such as groundwater or other conditions, or you're doing an addition. So if you do have one of those conditions, all you have to do is present that to building services. We'll review that and we can approve a cold vented crawl if you're doing a new building. Otherwise, you're going to want to go to R408.3, which is again the warm unvented crawl. And again, additions, you can do a cold crawl if you would like. Okay, R408.3, spaces under below grade floor. Again, this is the matching the IBC section, that when you have the below grade floors, for example, under a basement where you have that wood floor or you have a cavity under the slab, you do need mechanical ventilation designed by engineer. R902.1, roof covering materials. So this is a carryover we've had for many years, so we always require Class A fire retardant roof covering. Again, it's a carryover we've had for a long time. The exception is when you are doing a re-roof, you're allowed to do Class C. So if you are doing a re-roof of the same material, asphalt shingle to asphalt shingle, you can do Class C as in Charles instead of Class A if you want. Or if you're doing an addition, you can do Class C let's see, re-roof or addition. There you go. Yep. And then that also applies to when you're doing other materials such as brick, masonry, slate, clay, or concrete tile. Those are considered Class A. So those are non-combustible, so we consider those to be Class A. R905.12, ice barrier. So this was a clarification. We have our ice and water shield. All we did is clarify on this that you don't need to do that when you're doing a re-roof, because obviously there's no way to get that on the roof deck if you're doing a re-roof and you're doing an overlay. So that's when you're doing an overlay. So the code does allow, when you're doing asphalt shingles, to do that one overlay over one existing layer of roofing. When you have two layers of existing or more, when you're doing a re-roof, you have to tear everything off down to the deck and install that new roof covering. So there has been some confusion on that, so I wanted to make sure everybody is clear on that one. R905.21, asphalt shingles shall be fastened to solid deck. There has been some questions on, well, what do we consider a solid deck? Because there are some older buildings out there that have space sheeting, and when they're doing a re-roof and tearing off down to deck, we do have gaps, and so we consider when it has a gap of not exceeding 1/8 of an inch, we consider that solid. Otherwise, if you have gaps exceeding that, you would have to either replace those boards to remove those gaps, or, for example, you can do an overlay of OSB, for example. R905.242. All right, here's the one everybody loves. Asphalt shingle shall be Class 4 impact resistant and be tested in accordance with UL 2218. So there's a brand new requirement. So Class 4 is the highest level of impact resistance. So the goal here was to reduce the amount of re-roofs that we're doing due to hailstorms and other issues related to having to tear off existing roof coverings. So again, the goal here is to reduce the amount of re-roofs, reduce the amount of shingles that we are taking to the landfill. I know Jonathan talked a little bit about it. But again, that is a new requirement. The requirement right now in the field is we want you to provide some method of proof that you're doing Class 4. So whether it's leave a package out there, package of shingles out there, so we can verify that they're Class 4. You can, in some cases, we've approved a invoice to be brought in when they didn't have anything on site, because right now we are running a couple weeks behind on roof inspections. So we're a couple weeks after they schedule the inspection is when we're getting those done, because we have such a high volume of roof inspections. So in many cases, you're done and gone, and the inspection happens a few weeks later. And so we do understand that there has to be other methods of showing that it's Class 4.
Does photo work as proof for that?
We haven't. Yeah, we have not been approving pictures right now. It's difficult for us to verify what's
Yeah.
going on in photos. So we much prefer that you provide a package out there so we can see that, hey, yep, those are the shingles that are installed, they're class 4, and then you're in good shape. Any other questions? Class 4?
A question when it comes to, you guys all have a specification for wind rating. There are some 3 tabs available in a class 4 shingle, but they do not comply with the wind rating, so we'd have to default to a true laminated shingle that meets the wind warranty, correct?
Yeah, the wind requirement is still in the code. So if you don't think you could meet the wind rating and you still want to get that class 4, then you can come in and we can review that. So I can review that product and then potentially approve that. So if you want to do that, bring the information in and we can take a look at it. So let me repeat the question. So you're dealing with insurance companies that are not paying for the additional class 4 shingle costs. Is that?
Some of the insurance companies are saying they're not responsible for the code compliance. And so that's the biggest issue right now. And they said that if something was to happen now, because you did make a code in January, that they would be responsible. But as of this moment, because the storm happened in June, that they're saying they're not responsible for the code compliance.
Yeah, this is a tricky one because our code requirements are that you must comply with the code at the time you get the permit. So when the permit is issued, you have to comply with those code requirements. So if you're getting the permit today, even though the storm happened 6 months ago, you have to comply with class 4 shingles. I have had customers refer their insurance company to me, and I have been explaining to them in detail what the requirements are, and they have been then agreeing to pay for the upgrade on the class 4. I'm simply telling them it's required by our jurisdiction. So if you have that, you can send them to me, and I'll have a conversation with them. Yeah, we do have a handout for that, and we can get that to anybody who needs it. Yeah. Okay, our 1004.1 solid fuel fireplaces, stoves, room heaters. This is an amendment we've had for 20, 30 years, requiring EPA standards be met for any wood burning fireplace, wood burning stove, etc. And those units have to meet the EPA emission standards. So again, that's carryover. R104.4, 1004, unvented log heaters. This section is deleted, so we do not allow unvented appliances in the city of Fort Collins. We have not allowed that for many years. We consider those to be a little bit of a hazard. There's not a lot of data out there showing that they're safe. So we have not allowed those by local amendment for many years. And that is also, those sections are also located in the fuel gas code as well. So that applies to multifamily, commercial, and single family.
Russ? Do you allow unvented biofuel fireplaces that are UL approved as decorative appliances? They're not really heat sources?
We have not allowed those. However, if you wanted to submit information for approval, we can review that.
Thanks.
Okay, so we would normally get to Chapter 11 in the IRC, which is energy. Brad Smith is going to be covering that when I'm done with the main presentation here. So we're going to skip Chapter 11, energy efficiency, and move on to the mechanical sections of the IRC. So we're moving on to M1309, testing and verification. So what that is the local amendment that requires that HVAC system shall be performance tested and adjusted per our City of Fort Collins Residential New Construction Mechanical Systems Testing Guide. Wow, that's a mouthful. So that guide is available to anyone. We can email that to you, and we have staff that can go over the requirements of that if you have questions about that. So that's been required for new houses for many years. Again, we can get details to you if anybody needs that. Okay, 1401.3, heating and cooling system design, HVAC system design documents shall be submitted at the time of plan submittal. So it must be designed to ACCA Manual D, J, and S. So this is, again, a local amendment we've had for many years. So when you submit your plans, just make sure your HVAC design is included in that. If you have questions on that, again, my staff can answer those questions whenever you guys need. M1501.2, indoor depressurization. So ducted exhaust systems shall not induce or create a negative pressure to cause backdrafting of any combustion or fuel-fired appliance. So this is an amendment we've had for a while. We just want to make sure there's no backdrafting. So this relates to one of the issues we've had with kitchen exhaust hoods. Those hoods are really getting up there in CFM, and we want to make sure we don't have any backdrafting of fuel-fired appliances. 15054, whole dwelling unit mechanical ventilation. Again, a carryover we've had for a while. This requires that mechanical ventilation. There's a couple different methods. The most common method is the bath exhaust fan. So special requirements for that low zone bath fan. Creates negative pressure, bringing in ventilation else from other openings in the dwelling. That's the most common method of compliance. We can go over details of that, of other methods of compliance at building services if you have questions on that. And that is also required for multifamily and commercial, for multifamily as well. So it's any dwelling, any new dwelling. M16011. Above ground duct systems. So what we did here is, and this is a carryover, we did not want wall cavities, floor cavities, wood cavities to be used as plenums for supply and return. So what we did is we deleted item 7, which allows that, and so we do require that all supply and return be ducted, be hard ducted. And that is, again, also in the IMC, so that applies to commercial and multifamily as well.
So some of these that we do, we need more return air area. Then some duct can fit in can actually fit and go in between the joist spaces. Can you line the joist spaces with metal and basically make that sealed space with lining it and sealing it and all that?
Yeah, if you do have an area that you're having trouble complying and you want to line that and seal it, we would approve that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, M1602.2. So again, a carryover amendment, return air openings. So this is mostly affects multifamily that we've been seeing, but we want a return air path that is provided with ducts or transfer grills. And what we don't allow is door undercuts. So be careful on that one. I know that has affected some multifamily projects. Door undercuts is not a very efficient way to achieve return air, so we do require transfer grills or ducts.
Russ?
Yeah.
On those transfer airs, do you have to solid duct transfer airs as far as between rooms?
That does need to be ducted. So even though if it's a short, it might just be a short length of that, it does need to be ducted. Yeah.
Okay.
Or panned.
Okay, so if you're using a wall cavity, you'd have to pan both sides of the wall on each side of the room and have your openings cut in? Okay.
Yes. Okay, so now we're into the fuel gas sections of the IRC. So it's 2404.3, listed and labeled. So appliances regulated by this code shall be listed and labeled by an approved third party such as UL. So the change we made here, and this is a carryover we've had for many years, is that we want all appliances to be listed and labeled. We do not want unlisted appliances, so we deleted the section that allows that, and that is in the fuel gas code as well, so it applies to all buildings, commercial, multifamily, and single family. G2406.2, prohibited locations. Number 3 and 4, we deleted from this section that allows unvented appliances because we do not allow unvented appliances in Fort Collins. So any section that we have that refers to those, we deleted those. We always want vented appliances, fuel gas appliances in the city limits. And again, that applies to the fuel gas code as well, so all structures in the city limits. Any questions? 240711, combustion air ducts. So this allows wood cavities for combustion air ducts in existing buildings. So only in existing buildings where you have trouble getting a hard ducted combustion air opening, then you can pan or use a wood cavity in this condition in an existing building, as long as you are only removing, let me read this here, one fire stop, I believe it is. Maybe that's a different section. Obstruction of such openings or ducts that cause fuel burning equipment to release combustion products are dangerous levels. So again, this allows the combustion air duct to use a cavity in an existing building. 24, 15, 12, minimum burial depth. So this is a change. This is a new change. We had an amendment that changed the depth of underground gas piping for if it was a plastic or if it was any material. And so what we did is we took a look at this and we tried to make this simpler and make more sense. So what we did is we just said that for all plastic gas piping, it's got to be 18 inches deep. Everything else is 12 inches deep. So we tried to simplify this a bit, and what we did is the following section that talks about a single appliance that you run when you're running out to a single appliance. It had all these exceptions. We deleted that. So what we did is we kept everything as 18 and 12. So plastic gas piping, you're 18 inches deep for anything, 12 inches for other materials such as steel. And we kept it simple across the board so it's easier to comply, easier to remember. And there's that following section that we deleted. So 2417.4, test pressure. So this is an amendment we've had for a while in terms of establishing our test pressure for inspection. So we've had non-welded pipe, we've had 10 psi for a long time. What we did here is we added for welded pipe, it has to be 60 psi on test, and that we did add that to the fuel gas code as well. So again, that applies to any structure in city limits. 2427.5, chimney lining. So the exception here allows chimneys to be used for venting of appliances without being lined, and we deleted that. We do want a lining or ducts to be installed in those existing chimneys for new appliances that are going to be using that cavity. So that's carryover. Okay, 2427.6, minimum height. So this is for your terminations, your vent termination coming out of the structure. And we made this change in the fuel gas code, so again, this applies to any structure. So we want the minimum level to be 22 inches high. So we've had this amendment for a while, and this is a carryover. The goal here is we want those vent terminations, those PV, most commonly those PVC vent terminations from a furnace. We want those to be at a level where the snow is not going to block them. And so the 22 inches, the goal there is what's the average snow level? It's something like 11 inches, and we want those to be approximately a foot above that. So that's where we got that number from. And again, that's a carryover. 2447.6, kitchens and gas cooking. Residential kitchens with gas cooking appliances shall be supplied with an exhaust system to the outside. So this is a carryover. You have to have a hood or other method of venting to the outside when you have that gas cooking appliance. Carryover, we've had this for a while. What we did the last code cycle, not this code cycle, is we removed the CFM requirement based on BTU of that appliance. We were having trouble with a lot of different appliances were requiring a very large CFM hood, which when you exceed 400 CFMs, the code requires makeup air, and it has to be an integrated makeup air system. Those systems are very complicated and expensive. So what we did is remove the CFM to BTU requirement and just said you must have venting to the outside. Therefore, if you want to install a 400 or less, you can, and that meets the requirement. 2451 infrared heaters. So there's there's a section in the code that allows these new infrared ceiling hung heaters, and the concern was the last code cycle was that there is no requirement for combustion air or ventilation air required for these fuel gas appliances. And so what we did is we added the requirement that you do have to provide that at a rate of 4 CFM per 1,000 BTU. So you do have to have some means of ventilation in that area for that appliance. Again, that's carryover. And the last section is moving on to plumbing. So P2903.2. So this is the flow rates for fixtures, water consumption rate for fixtures. So most of this is carryover. We do have some changes. So we've had for a long time that lab faucets were lowered from 2.2 code as written to 1.5. We're keeping that. The change that we made this go around was we have shower heads. We've lowered shower heads from 2.2 GPM to 1.8 GPM. So that is a new change. And then the sink faucets, we kept them at 1.8, local amendment. And then water closets, the new change on water closets was we've kept the 1.28 GPF gallons per flush requirement. But what we did, the change we made here, was the flushing performance, otherwise known as the MAP score, will rise from 350 to 600. So what we found is that there was a lot of complaints from the 1.28 toilets with the lower MAP scores had a lot of failures, had a lot of flush failures, and so what we did is raise it to 600 in hopes that we would get a lot fewer failed flushes, and we have heard that when you get to the 600 levels, that it does make a big difference. So the goal there is fewer failed flushes, better performance, less water used, and so that's the change that we made there. And these changes that we're talking about also apply to the IPC as well. So these changes are required for not just single family, but also for commercial and multifamily as well.
Just a quick question back to the minimum height on the gas vents. In a re-roof situation, would we have to bring that up to the minimum height if it's an existing pipe?
Not for an existing installation. Yeah, if that's not changing, you can keep it as is. The last plumbing fixture change was to the IPC, and the reason I'm talking about this now is because I'm not going to go into the IPC separately because this is all the changes we made are matching in the IRC with this exception, with this last one, and this was in IPC and the code. The state of Colorado adopts the plumbing code. We do not adopt it separately, so we fall under their umbrella. And what we did is we changed Table 604 lavatory faucet for non-residential to go from 1.5 GPM to 0.5. So that is non-residential. So for example, when you have an office area and you're doing your labs in your restrooms, those would be 0.5 instead of 1.5. So that's only, again, for non-residential, and that does not apply to institutional or educational facilities. So that's, again, that's the last plumbing fixture change. Okay, so moving on to some electrical requirements. Section E30401.5, EV ready. So this is a carryover amendment. So we want those new houses to be EV ready. So this is where we're requiring the conduit. When you have an attached garage, you have to have a conduit. And the change here is we went from 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch conduit, metal conduit, from the panel to a junction box accessible in the garage, capable of supporting a 50 amp 220 volt system. And again, the change here was the 50 amp, and that's because more and more vehicles are requiring a Type 2 charger. And so the goal here is, again, to allow that infrastructure to be put in place so that you can install that easily in the future. So the change here is the 3/4 inch conduit and the 50 amp. So that will allow that larger size system. And then the following section, 34016, PV ready, is a similar requirement where you have to have the metal conduit, and again, we're changing it from 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch, from the attic space near where the panels would be installed down to the panel board for the future installation of that infrastructure, of that system. Okay, Appendix F. So this is the radon section. So Appendix F we have adopted. So again, that's the radon section in the IRC. It is very similar to what our local amendment was, with a few exceptions. And so what we did is we're going to go over some of the amendments we made to that section, and we just amended a couple of them. And again, we are adopting for the first time that appendix which governs radon. So we'll be using that radon section for all dwelling construction, including multifamily. So on AF 103.2, we added that each radon reduction vent pipe riser shall serve no more than 4,000 square feet. The reason we added that is because those systems are going to be used for multifamily as well. So where we have for example, where you have a large footprint of a multifamily building, if you had 8,000 square foot footprint, then you would have 2 loops, each of 4,000 for that radon riser. So that's an example. That's why we added that. AF 103.3, soil gas retarder. So this section is only regarding a soil gas retarder required for under slabs. That's the only requirement for this section, and the reason we deleted this is because we have multiple contractors complain that there are a lot of problems when you are requiring, for example, poly under a new slab. It doesn't cure. There's multiple issues with putting poly under a new slab. So we deleted that because we have found that it is not necessary in this climate in our area, and so we just deleted that section. AF 103.5.1, ventilation. So again, we deleted this section because there was a conflict. It sent you back to R401, which was ventilation and cold crawl, and we don't want that because, again, the energy code has specific sections requiring warm crawls, and so we didn't want that conflict in the code, so we deleted that section. So that's what that is for. And then the next section, soil gas retarder, we amended that because we wanted more details that matched our old amendment about what we require for the soil gas retarder. So this section goes into the more specifics of what we want for that poly, for example, and in this case 6 mil poly or 3 mil cross laminated poly soil gas retarder, and the lapping of that. So typically, when you have a crawl space, for example, that's the details of that membrane that we want to make sure that we add it into the code. The next section, 103.13, provisions for a future fan installation. So again, we've always required that. It wasn't outlined very well in the new radon IRC section, so again, we added this in. So the future area for fan installation must be provided. So what that entails is you have to have an outlet and a light in that area where the fan could be installed in the future. So again, the passive system is what's required, not the active. This is just the provisions to be able to activate that system in the future. Okay, so now we're moving on to the 2018 IMC, International Mechanical Code amendments. A lot of those we already covered. So where I referenced IMC in some of the previous sections, I won't be talking about those requirements again. So these are only the ones that we haven't talked about yet. So 107.3 testing and verification. So HVAC system shall be performance tested and approved agency and adjusted to operate within their specs. So the most common example of this would be for multifamily building. We want each unit to be test and balanced, and so we require a tab for each unit, each dwelling unit in multifamily. That's the most common application of that, and that's a carryover amendment.
So again, on multifamily, you require the balancing of each unit. We're talking about just maybe the fan coil or the furnace within that unit, but not a grill by grill balance. Is that correct?
That is correct. I mean, we want the system to be, each dwelling unit to be looked at, and we do recognize that some of those are very small, simple systems, but we do want at least the HVAC contractor, so it doesn't have to be an official tab contractor. It can be the HVAC installer, has to at least provide a simple test of balance of those systems, and we want that documented so that we know that that's been done. Okay, 504.1, closed dryer exhaust installation. Exhaust termination should not be located within 3 foot exterior openings into conditioned spaces such as crawls and attics. Again, carryover. We want to make sure that we get those closed dryer exhaust to the outside. 506.311, grease duct enclosures. Exception is deleted that allows a non-rated grease duct that penetrates only a non-fire resistance rated roof ceiling assembly. So this is a carryover we've had for many years. So this was in response to concern by not only building services, but Poudre Fire Authority about where you have that restaurant, typical one-story restaurant. This allowed the grease duct to be non-protected, in where you have a concealed grease duct that you can't see. So we deleted that. We always require that a grease duct be protected when it's concealed. So whenever you have that grease duct going up through a ceiling area and you can't see it, we do require a rated grease duct. So again, that's carryover. 512.1, subslab soil exhaust system. So what we did here is we wanted to make sure that where you have a subslab system, that it also complies with the radon section so that they're not in conflict. So what we did is just reference that system shall conform to the Appendix F radon requirement. Okay, so that was it for the IMC, since we covered many of those in the previous codes. And now we're moving on to the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. So again, this is the code that requires most of the requirements for any kind of pool or spa. This code governs multiple types of different pools and spas. So it is for single-family home pools, it's for multifamily. They have a different chapter for multifamily pools, a different chapter for public, for example, municipal swimming pools, and even for aquatic centers such as Water World. So there are multiple chapters in that code. Most of the barrier requirements are the same. So the typical 4-foot tall barrier is still in place. The self-closing gate, latching, that's all still in there. Most of that has not changed. All we're doing here is referencing, we're adopting that new code, and we did make a couple of minor changes, so that's what I'll be covering now. So 304, flood hazard areas. So flood hazard area, that is covered by Chapter 10 in the city code. So what this is doing is, in multiple sections of the other codes, and including this code, they have flood hazard area code sections. So we delete those because we have Chapter 10 in our municipal code that covers floodplain requirements. So where we have this, and this is in multiple of our codes, we delete those flood hazard areas and just reference our Chapter 10. So if you guys have any questions on that, feel free to come down to Building Services and we can provide Chapter 10 details, or even better, we can have you meet with the floodplain officer and they can go over the requirements for you on that. The only other thing we did is, when we deleted this section, we had one code section that we thought was important, so we actually kept that. So 304.2, we're actually keeping that even though we deleted the rest of that section, and that was GFI protection for outlets for electrical equipment installed below the design flood elevation shall be supplied with branch circuits that are GFI protected. So we thought that was an important one, so we did keep that one section in the section 304. And then 403.1, maximum bather load. So this was a new one to us because there is a occupant load chapter in the Pool and Spa Code that is slightly different than the Chapter 10 of the IBC. There was confusion there and concern that these occupant loads are going to be looked at very differently, and we thought that the Chapter 10, normal IBC Chapter 10 occupant load numbers were sufficient. So what we did is we deleted that section that refers to the different occupant load chart and just said refer to IBC Chapter 10. 410.1, toilet facilities. So this is the restroom requirements for pool, spa areas. And what we did here is it was required for Class A, B pools, which A, for example, would be the aquatic centers, the public municipal swimming pools. B would be like the multifamily pool area. And then C was hotels and apartments, and we wanted that covered as well. So what we did is we added type C pools in there so that we would require facilities for the hotel and apartment pools as well. So we want to make sure we have facilities for those. So this next section is going to be going over the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code, so the IECC. It will also be going over the IRC Chapter 11 requirements. So this will be energy for everything, energy code for commercial, multifamily, and single family. So what I'd like to do at this point is introduce Brad Smith. So he is our Energy Services Compliance Officer, and he will take over. And the good news is that this presentation is much more lively than mine. So, Brad?
Great. Hi. Thanks for coming out, everybody. You know, when I first thought about this, I thought maybe we should work something into this where we drop some confetti, you know, have a smoke machine or something like that. But then I thought, you know what, building code is exciting enough. We're probably good. So here we are. So thanks, Russ. I am Brad Smith. I am the Energy Code Specialist with the City of Fort Collins, so all things energy code. We're going to tackle, at the very beginning of this, local amendments, and then I'm going to dive into significant changes to the energy code. Before we jump into that, though, I want to kind of preface this with something I received yesterday, just kind of a little factoid. So I was sent an email yesterday, kind of seemingly unrelated to work, and it kind of piqued my interest. It kind of made me think of us all together in this room, kind of working toward something in common. The email referenced a book, and I want to kind of read you an excerpt from this book. The book is called The Pale Blue Dot. It's written by Carl Sagan, a famed cosmologist and astrophysicist. I was worried I would stumble over the word cosmologist and say cosmetologist, but I made it. So to preface this a little, I want to give you a little bit of background about this, a pale blue dot. In 1990, Voyager 1, a spacecraft, was traveling 4 billion miles from Earth. It turned back and snapped a photo of the planets it had orbited or just visited. In this photo of vast darkness, I'll give you a link here in a little bit where you can actually see the photo. There was a small pale blue dot, not even the size of a pixel in the photo. The pale blue dot, Earth. So in a talk about the book, Carl Sagan said, look again at that dot. Look again at the dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. To quote the book and Carl Sagan, there's perhaps no better demonstration of human folly, conceits, than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. So, if you're interested, I have put this reference on my website, fcgov.com/energy code. If you visit that page down at the bottom, there is an additional resources link and a section that is called miscellaneous. So if you want to look at that, feel free to visit the page. So let's kind of jump right into International Energy Conservation Code, my favorite code. So to start, we're going to cover commercial, C sections, residential, R sections, and Russ had mentioned in his presentation, I'm going to kind of move around a little bit so we can get out of the way here. International Residential Code, Chapter 11, those are sections N. So we'll start with this, our local mechanical design parameters, and most of these are going to remain the same. So we've got outdoor dry bulb temperatures for winter and summer, those are 90 and 6. And our indoor dry bulb temperatures, which are 72 and 75. So those did not change. What did change is where that information is found. So in the IRC, we reference a table, the Climatic and Geographic Design Criteria Table. So now you'll see those design parameters within that table. That table is R301.2. Let's kind of jump right into now the envelope requirements for electric heated buildings. We get questions on this from time to time, and we have had a little change here specific to exterior insulation. So what we're really doing is we're really kind of looking to kind of prohibit or discourage the installation of poly or plastic on the interior of framed walls when there is less than an R5 continuous insulation on the exterior of the building. The reason for that is R5 is not a high enough R value to actually discourage or create a non-condensing surface. And the exterior insulation will slow drying potential through that wall enough that if there is moisture in there, it's not going to dry to the exterior as easily. So it forces drying to the interior, and we don't want poly or plastic on there to prohibit drying to the interior. We also are doing this in our footnote in R402.1.2, our insulation and fenestration requirements table. And you'll see here, same thing for a wood framed wall, 13 plus a 5, where we've got footnote L. same thing. Class 1 vapor retarders, again, plastic on the interior framed walls. If there's anything less than an R5 on the exterior, no plastic. I also want to touch on IRC, Table 1102.1, footnote I for basement wall R value, or basement L, or sorry, footnote L. And that says that an R15 bat is allowed for existing dwellings with uninsulated basements. We also added a section in code where we reference grade 1 standard for insulation. This was indirectly addressed in the IECC section R303.2 installation standards, where it actually says that installation of components, including insulation, shall be installed per manufacturer's instructions. That's the general definition of grade 1 standard of insulation. This diagram kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're looking for in the field. Our building inspectors sitting over there in the corner have been educated on this and are looking for new to 2018 code, a grade 1 standard of install. So I'll kind of jump from there into insulation of the slabs on grade. This is now a mandatory requirement in all construction. What we're looking for, and as code reads, I've got a little note down here at the bottom that says the perimeter insulation shall extend downward from the top of the slab. This is something that we see done incorrectly quite often, and I've given you some examples. To the right, you can see kind of my red thumbs down of what does not meet code. Now, I understand that not all installs are going to be able to do this. If you are unable to do this, you're going to have to probably look at requesting a variance. So some of these installs may include a brick ledge where it's just problematic to set the brick ledge on top of the insulation. But really what we're looking for here is insulation to extend all the way from top of slab down. So if you look at these images to the right here in this slide, you can kind of see some examples of insulation that does not meet the requirement. Air tightness testing. Most of you are familiar with this, not a new thing. We've required this in town for quite some time. As a matter of fact, code has required this for a long time. One of the things that has changed this year is the adoption of ResNet ICC 380 standard. We require in the city of Fort Collins, as most of you know, a multi-point air leakage test instead of a single point test. This new standard, which we've chose to adopt, still requires a multi-point test. It just no longer, we in the city of Fort Collins with this standard no longer require a 7-point test. We can go down to as low as 5 pressures during the test. So I've kind of got a little footnote here. Multi-point air leakage test can now be reported at a minimum of 5 pressure differences instead of the previous 7. So one of the things that Energy Code addressed this year was ducts located inside a conditioned space, and they addressed this by way of mounting insulation over the ducts that would be installed in an unconditioned space like an attic. So we in the Fort Collins, in the city of Fort Collins, decided to amend out some exceptions to this. So there were some rules that said if you mound over the insulation, it shall be considered within conditioned space. And in a situation like that, you would not be required to perform a duct tightness test on the system. If you don't know and you haven't been in homes post-occupation or post-occupancy of the home, you'll see in the picture at right, this is what we often see. That insulation a year later, 2 years later, often gets disturbed. The ducts are now uncovered. So in effect, we end up with ducts, again, outside conditioned space. So really what we're looking for is, this is nothing that has changed from how you guys are used to doing things. If a duct is to be considered inside conditioned space, it needs to be within the continuous air barrier and the building thermal envelope. So basically business as usual for you guys. Our simulated performance alternative, SPA path or HERS ratings. we're referencing now a guide, our City of Fort Collins Residential New Construction SPA Guide, or Simulated Performance Guide. In that guide, it now states that in order to obtain your certificate of occupancy, we're not just looking for a cost compliance document, we're also looking for the home energy rating certificate. So you should be receiving a certificate with a noted HERS score on that home. What was happening prior was people were not including that, and ResNet HERS raters, we had some ResNet HERS rater in the field that were not registering their documents, so there was no QA oversight on those documents. So by requiring the home energy rating certificate, they're required to register that document with ResNet. As they register that document with ResNet, they're now susceptible to QA oversight from ResNet. So we were just looking for a little bit of additional oversight. So I think we're moving along pretty good here, so we'll kind of just jump right into significant changes. If anybody has any questions about what I've covered so far, please feel free to kind of raise your hand and let me know. Are we good? Does anybody have any questions? We're good so far? Okay. So some of the significant changes to the 2018 International Energy Conservation Code are for heated slabs. So one of the things that was added was now insulation underneath the slab. Some of you guys are already doing this, and I think as a best practice, this was done in previous years anyway. If you're heating the slab, you're now required to have a minimum of R5 insulation underneath that slab, in addition to the insulation that is on the slab edge. So if you are heating the slab and you've got insulation underneath the slab, and I've got an image of this on a slide here in the next couple slides, but you do not need to install insulation 1, 2, 3 feet down the stem wall. So down the slab, the edge of the slab, and then horizontally underneath the slab. Opaque thermal envelope, this is new in code, and also ComCheck, which a lot of you are familiar with. There's a new option for overhead doors. We're seeing quite a few overhead doors. So garage doors with less than 14% glazing are now required to meet a U factor of 0.31 or better. In a lot of cases, if you're installing an overhead door, there are IECC compliant overhead doors that will meet this requirement. So the only thing here would be do your homework, research the doors that are available, and make sure that you pick one that actually meets those requirements. One of the things I do want to point out here is if you upgrade to the newer versions of ComCheck, they do have this option in there. And you'll see where I've got circled down here, it's a little bit blurry. But when you're selecting doors in these places, please select either non-swinging, swinging, and in this case, if it is an overhead door, select garage door with less than 14% glazing if it meets that requirement. The reason I say this is because it will actually do you a little bit of favor in ComCheck. If you select a non-swinging door, sometimes it will penalize you a little bit more than a garage door with less than 14% glazing would. So it might be harder to pass that ComCheck code compliance document if you make the wrong selection. Again, this is new in ComCheck, so if you're using an older version of ComCheck, please upgrade to the newer version. You can also use, as a little FYI, there is a ComCheck web version that you can use. So, and if anybody is not familiar with this, these are free tools developed for the Department of Energy for compliance. So on that website, there is a download section, and there's also a link to ComCheck web. Section C 402.2.5, below grade walls. The C factor or R value required shall extend to a depth of not less than 10 feet below the outside finished grade level. This has really not been an issue in town, but really what we're saying is we want the entire foundation wall insulated. That's really what we're looking for. Air spaces, this is kind of a new thing, and we don't see this very often, but there is an actual R value that can be associated with an air space. The requirement here is that if you're accounting for this in your wall assembly, let's say a wall assembly, that airspace does need to be enclosed on all sides. So if you have a section that would be open at the bottom, that does not meet the requirements of airspaces. So often you see this with maybe a brick assembly on the outside and a wall here. If that airspace below is used to be included in your entire U factor, or R value within that assembly, it needs to be completely sealed. Just a little note to this, the R value determination factors, if you want to do the calculations, can be found in the ASHRAE Handbook of Fundamentals. And I'll probably at some point, I'll plug my website again, and I'll probably link that handbook on my website. So, occupant sensor controls for buildings and commercial buildings and spaces has now been expanded to include controls for offices, including open plan office areas. Something that we're seeing a lot more of, and occupant sensor controls are now required for those spaces as well. That language is actually specific in the code book. Additional efficiency in packages. This is again kind of going back to ComCheck. If you're choosing the U-factor alternative to compliance for commercial buildings, this is something that's new in ComCheck and new in code, and this is something that I think we should talk a little bit about because most people choose lighting, high-performance lighting, high-performance HVAC equipment as an additional efficiency package when you're doing your ComCheck document. So you're required to do an envelope and then choose one additional package. This is a benefit to everybody in town because, as a lot of you may know, especially the commercial builders, we require air tightness testing in commercial buildings as well as residential buildings and homes. So, benefit is you can now select this, which you're required to do anyway, in ComCheck as an additional efficiency package. So in the drop-down menu, you can see as compliance options here, you have the reduced air infiltration option. Again, if you're using the most current version of ComCheck or ComCheck Web. So the actual slab has to be heated. So if you have, if you're radiant heating the slab, that would be a heated slab. So if it's a mechanical system just heating the conditioned space, that's not a heated slab. So anytime that the slab itself is part of the entire area of the slab has to be R5 under the slab. So performance-based compliance, commercial buildings, the reduction in energy cost of proposed design associated with on-site renewable energy shall not be more than 5% of the total energy cost. As a lot of you know, the performance-based compliance is based on energy cost of a building. So what they're saying is here, if you're using on-site renewable energy, it cannot reduce that cost by more than 5% of the total energy cost of that building per year. So you can't, basically what we're trying to say here is you can't build a barn and throw a bunch of PV on it and meet the code requirement. Residential has a similar requirement for the ERI path that doesn't allow excess amount of solar to meet cost compliance. We're saying don't forsake the envelope of the building for renewable energy. Well, jumping into residential here, some of you guys may know, I know this was an issue that we discussed at our code review committee, but we did drop from a 0.32 window U factor to a 0.30 straight out of code for our climate zone 5 or 5B. We did do a little research on this. Windows with a U factor of 0.30 or better are readily available, so there shouldn't be any issue with that. As a matter of fact, a lot of builders are already doing that and better. Jumping into the heated slab, I do have a little bit of a diagram here. Again, footnote, this is also residential, R section 402.1.2, and IRC section N 1102.1.2. R5 shall be provided under the full area of the slab, just like we discussed in the question here. So got a little diagram here just to kind of show you what we're looking for. Again, you don't have to run the entire length down the stem wall, down the height of the slab edge, and underneath the entire slab. Whole house mechanical ventilation, there was an increase in the CFM per watt, dropped to raised from 1.2 CFM per watt. This is for any flow rate of your whole house mechanical ventilation efficiency, fan efficiency, and is required for HRVs and ERVs. I did a little bit of research on this. Almost all HRVs and ERVs, everything that you see typically in a house, VENMARs and whatnot, all meet this requirement. I haven't seen anything yet that doesn't meet this requirement, so shouldn't be too big of an issue. New this year is we jumped from 75% high efficiency lighting to 90%. Again, we're not seeing too much issue with this in the field. Most people have moved to LED lighting. It's becoming standard in homes today. So I don't expect this to be much of an issue at all, but we do now require 90% of all fixtures be high efficacy. I mentioned just a little bit ago the Energy Rating Index, or the ERI. This is similar to a HERS rating or a performance index. You would need a HERS rater to do this, and they score the house. It's the same thing as a HERS score. The 2015 code had an ER rating of a 55 in Climate Zone 5. In Fort Collins, the average HERS rated home comes in at about a 58 to a 62. So 55 would be a little bit of a challenge. So it was raised in the 2018 code to a 61, a score of a 61. And again, this requires a HERS rater providing you with this score for compliance. We don't see a lot of this, but we do from time to time. Any questions about that? I know it's not very common in town. I think we may see more of this as we kind of move into the future, but right now we don't see a lot. One thing I should mention here, because this gets asked quite a bit, there is a 2009 backstop for buildings, so that's our envelope table. So you can't be worse than 2009 insulation requirements. If you put renewable energy on a building, that backstop jumps to the previous code cycle. So in this case, 2015 envelope requirements. And that is all I have for you today. I do want to point you to my website. This is a relatively new web page that I've developed. I'm trying to provide you with resources. That website is fcgov.com/energy code. My contact information is up here if anybody has any questions.
Earlier, there was a item that Russ had mentioned, I think in the radon portion of the code, where we no longer needed to put poly underneath our floor slabs because it was creating a problem with our concrete curing. But if we want to do a heated slab, we have to put insulation directly under there. Doesn't that create the same problem?
So poly is considered a class 1 vapor barrier. So plastic, seams overlap, tape sealed, no moisture goes through that. If you're putting XPS insulation underneath the concrete slab, XPS does have some drying potential through the insulation.
Okay.
So it will slow drying through it, but it will allow drying through that in some fashion. So,
is there a possibility of placing that insulation below 4 inches of crushed aggregate and then our concrete?
It needs to be tight to the slab. I suppose if you wanted to put the aggregate down, you could insulate, put the aggregate down, and then bring that slab edge up. Yeah, you could do that. But I think effectively, you're still running into the same issue. You just got that 4 inches of aggregate. So there's still, you're drying. It's just, is it tight to the slab where we're drying through it, or 4 inches of aggregate? I think either way it would be the same. Again, I don't have a lot of experience dealing with that, but I don't know that it would be any different either way.
Okay, so the next section, before I introduce the next speaker, I want to go over a couple things that I forgot to mention this morning on the intro, and I wanted to explain the clean version of the amendment package that you were emailed. The reason I call that a clean version is because what that is omitting is, from the final ordinance version, is all the strikeouts. So I wanted to explain that. So, for example, where we deleted the radon amendment, which is 4 pages of old amendment strikeout, it's kind of silly to give you 4 pages of strikeout, of text strikeouts. So that is not in your clean version. So the clean version has far fewer pages. There's like 15 pages of strikeout that you don't have. If for some reason you want that, you can always get the full ordinance version of the amendments on the city website, or available down at Building Services at any time for you. So I wanted to explain that. And then with that said, I will introduce Sarah Carter, Lead Senior Plans Examiner, with the next section.
So I'm going to cover significant changes to the 2018 IBC and IRC. I don't know if we have any Game of Thrones fans in here, but brace yourselves. We've got some change coming. So we'll cover the IBC first. There is a reference guide called the Significant Changes to the International Building Code. This is a great book. This is kind of what I used to write this presentation. So there's a lot of really good information in here. We're not going to cover all of it, but if you want one of these, they're available on the ICC website. So jumping right in, section 302.1 has changed to clarify occupancy for occupied roofs. So these are your rooftop patios. Generally, we see a lot of people wanting to put pool decks on their roofs. So what this covers is that occupied roofs shall be classified as an occupancy that it most nearly resembles, according to the fire and relative hazard. So we're going to start clarifying that those are assigned an occupancy. And then in section 50314, we established the height allowance for those occupied roofs. Essentially, the occupied roof is allowed if the story immediately below that roof is at an allowable height for that occupancy. Do you have any questions on that? We've had some confusion, I think. Okay. The area of the occupied roof will not be included in your allowable building area, though. So that doesn't count against your allowable building area as a story. That's just what we're using to establish that height allowance. Chapter 4 has added a couple sections. 427, addressing medical gas systems. This is already found in the IFGC, but they've moved it over the same language into the IBC just for clarity, so we can all find it. Those provisions haven't changed. They're just in a new location. Section 428 adds some provisions around higher education labs. So these are your college laboratories, and that lays out parameters for these to be considered B occupancy rather than getting into H occupancy. So we see these mostly in your college IBMC type applications. Section 7052 adjusts fire separation distance for projections. So previously this table was actually more restrictive and could require a fire separation distance of up to 20 feet. So that was getting a little crazy. Now the maximum required fire separation distance from a property line is 40 inches. And you can see, ooh, no you can't see. This table is really blurry. They've made changes to that table. So if you're 5 feet or greater, and there are a few clarifying footnotes, but if you're 5 feet or greater from that property line, your projection can instead extend up to 40 inches from that property line or your line used for fire separation distance. Section 70611 modifies requirements for party walls on property lines. So party walls located on property lines, this is a shared wall on a property line, are no longer required to be constructed as firewalls under certain circumstances. So if you meet all of these requirements, the entire building, counting both sides of the property line, meets the height and area provisions of Chapter 5. The copies of recorded easements and agreements permitting each owner to access the other side of the building to maintain fire and life safety systems are provided to the building official for approval. And occupancy separation, fire area, and other fire separation walls still have to be constructed as they apply. Okay? So in these cases, if we've got a building that essentially crosses a property line but has a party wall essentially to divide ownership, if you meet these requirements, we can get that approved without constructing a firewall. Section 902 added some more requirements for fire pump and riser rooms. The room size requirements haven't changed, they're still in there, but provisions have been added for access, which we've amended a little bit, and Russ covered that. Door marking, and then heating and lighting are also required. Let's see, oh, this is a long section. Section 903.3.1.2.3. Can't believe I just said that. Okay, this adds attic protection for 13R sprinkler systems. So I don't know if anybody's heard those rumors that 13R sprinklers now require attic protection, but that is sort of correct. It requires attic protection in certain cases. So if an attic is used or intended for living or storage purposes, you've got to protect that attic. If it contains fuel-fired equipment, and then in attics of type 3, 4, or 5 construction, if the roof assembly is more than 55 feet above the lowest level of fire access. So that's generally from grade, and we're going to measure to the tallest point of the roof to get that 55 feet. Okay, so if you've got a building taller than that, you're going to be required to sprinkle that attic. There are some other provisions in that section that talk about filling that cavity with non-combustible insulation, and there's some other ways to deal with that. So if you run into this situation, take a look at that, or call plan review, or fire authority should have some information on that as well. Okay, section 904.13 requires protection of domestic cooking appliances, where we're seeing them in I1 and I2 occupancies, and then group R2 college dorms. This would include sorority and fraternity type applications as well. So your domestic kitchens that we're seeing in your assisted living or nursing home type applications, or in your college dorms, those hoods need to be either fitted with automatic fire extinguishing system, or the range itself can have ignition resistant burners, but one of those two is required in those applications. Section 905.3.1 requires a standpipe when we're 4 or more stories above grade. So now, regardless of the height of that floor, if we're 4 stories or more, you've got to get your standpipes in. Okay? That used to be 30 feet, if I'm remembering correctly. And now it's, regardless, if the 30 feet is still in there, but it's 30 feet or 4 stories. Table 1004.5 changed how we look at occupant load factors in B occupancies. The occupant load factor for business areas has been 100 square feet for quite some time. It's now 150, just due to changes in how we're laying out offices and what we're seeing, just, the direction of the design trends. So you can use 150 square feet gross for your occupant load and your B occupancies, except when we're dealing with something like a call center, where we have bullpens and people just crammed in there, or a whole bunch of cubicles and we've got people crammed in there, then we have to use 50 square feet. Okay? There are provisions where you can count the number of seats, and we can look at establishing occupant load that way, but that has to be approved by the building official. So, but now we've got a little more flexibility in business area design.
Mechanically, when we're talking about ventilation of a space, do these changes in occupancy counts relate to the IMC?
They will, where you have to provide ventilation on a per occupant basis, but not where it's on a per square foot basis. So you'll just want to follow your tables. Table 1008.2.3 is just a clarification. I debated whether or not to include this, but this talks about illumination between your exit and your public way or safe dispersal area. So what the code says is that we need to provide illumination so that people can, once they get out the door of the building, they can get to their safe area. So, and I think I should have written it in here, 1 foot candle. We'd have to look, but there's minimum requirements for that lighting. Wow, my pictures are so blurry. This is the beer garden at Anheuser-Busch. They did a really nice job here where they've got it lit from the door all the way out into the parking lot. This section doesn't require this isn't emergency illumination. This is just your egress, exit, discharge, and dispersal area illumination. So your emergency illumination requirements are dealt with separately. And so you'll want to refer to those code sections for where you need to provide that. Okay. Section 1017.3 clarifies travel distance and common path. This one's been confusing, I think, for a while. What is the common path, and how do we use it? So your common path is a portion of the total travel distance from the furthest point of a room or space to the point Oh, look, I repeated myself. To the point where 2 distinct exit paths are available. So you can have, I believe it's 75 or 100 feet, depending on your occupancy and sprinkler situation. You can but that is the maximum distance you can travel in a room or a space before I have a choice of 2 paths to get out of that building. Okay, so that's not in addition to your total travel distance, that's a portion of your total travel distance. Table 1607.1 changes balcony and deck live load requirements. The table has been updated to match ASCE 7, I believe 10 and, I'm going to misspeak, 15? It's the most recent ASCE as well. I'm going to forget the year because I'm standing up here with a bunch of people looking at me. But the table has been updated to match. The live load now must be 1.5 times the load of the occupancy served, but it is not required to exceed 100 PSF. Now, if you're going to put a big giant hot tub on there, we might want to talk about that. But in normal cases where we're dealing with a balcony, 1.5 times the load of the occupancy served is what we're going to be looking for, rather than previously where it has been the same floor load as the occupancy served. Table 1607.15.2 adds a lateral load requirement for firewalls. So firewalls, and this is firewalls specifically, not partitions or barriers, must now be designed to support a 5 PSF lateral load following the collapse of structure on either side of the wall. There's a couple reasons for that. As structure collapses, it could lean on that wall, and we want it to stay put. In addition, there's been, the way they actually do this test is they put a fire hose on it. We want that wall to stay up while we're fighting the fire. So it needs to be able to resist that 5 PSF load once we lose a portion of the structure on one side. Tables 2308.4.1.1, 1 and 2 are now designed to use Southern Pine 2. So we've seen changes in those span charts, but because of the inconsistent availability of Southern Pine 1, they have now updated these span charts to show allowable spans for Southern Pine 2. So hopefully that makes things a little bit easier for our framers, a little bit easier to get material, and then clears up questions that we've had about why those spans have come down. Section 3001.2 adds an accessibility element to elevator communication systems. So where emergency two-way communication is required, you must now provide usable features for individuals with hearing or speech impairment. So text and video-based systems are something we're going to be looking for. So if I've got somebody that can't hear when somebody comes over that speaker, we can still communicate with them and get them help. I had a joke about construction. Still working on it. Stay with me. We're almost done, guys. You like that, Brad? Okay, good. It's just for you. All right, moving on to significant changes to the IRC. You can find this book, same place you find the IBC, on the ICC website. These are really helpful. So, moving into residential. Section 302, R302.13 adds electric heating to fire protection of floors. So as we were talking about earlier, when you have heating appliances in your crawl space, you have to provide floor protection to the underside of those floor joists. Okay. Previously, that was only fuel-fired appliances. Now it's fuel or electric heating appliances. You will need to provide underfloor protection in those crawl spaces.
So is that new construction only? Like, say we're building an addition and we want to give that, it's a mother-in-law addition, it has a zoned heating system specifically for that. Is that going to have to be protected even though it's attached to an existing building?
Yeah, you'll have to protect the new construction portion of that addition.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, R311.7.3. This increases the maximum stair rise between landings. This is too far. I don't know if you guys know, this is the Manitou Incline down in Manitou Springs. It's about a mile long. So because newer trends in home construction include higher ceilings, we're seeing larger spans, so we're seeing deeper floor joists installed. The committee that looked at this decided to go ahead and raise the maximum vertical rise from 147 inches to 151 inches. It's right about 20 risers. Okay, so hopefully that'll give you guys a little more flexibility, getting people up and down. Make sure you have handrails. These guys don't. Sections R311.7.11 and 12 now allow ladders and alternating tread devices to be used as egress components for lofts of 200 square feet or less. Okay. They brought this into the code to kind of help with some of the trends with tiny house design and very, very small living spaces. Okay, so those are now more than just a means of access. That can be a portion of the means of egress for that loft. Section 3.24.6 adds provisions for roof access around PV panels. This has been, I believe it moved to the fire code and then came back. It is back in the IRC and it mirrors the requirements that are in the 2018 fire code. These are just provisions for smoke venting and for firefighters to get around these. And it just lays out all the details on what we're going to want to see for your PV panel layouts as far as distances from ridges and eaves. So section R325.6 addresses when a habitable attic is not a story. Okay, so when you've got an attic and somebody wants to finish it because they want a playroom or something like that up there, if the occupiable floor area is 70 feet or more, how did this work? This confused me a little. It has a ceiling height in accordance with R305. The space is enclosed by the roof assembly above, knee walls if applicable, and the floor assembly below, and the floor space does not extend beyond the exterior walls of the floor below. We're going to call that a habitable attic. Okay, that isn't going to be considered a story. Okay, section R507 deals with decks. This has been rearranged, reorganized, and additional provisions have been added. In an attempt to make this section easier to use, the provisions have been reorganized to follow construction sequence. So that's how you'll see that laid out. Provisions have been added to address items like materials, fasteners, flashing, and we have a pure table in there now. R507.2.1 adds specific requirements for wood materials to the deck section itself. Previously, you found most of this in your Chapter 3 requirements for wood materials, but this addresses wood materials for decks outside. And it adds a requirement that these need to be designed using the American Wood Council NDS wet service factor, because those are exposed to the weather. Here's table R507.3.1 addressing pier sizes. If you have questions about soil bearing capacity, you can ask your friendly local engineer. I'm sure they'd be happy to help you. Table R507.5 adds spans for single ply beams for southern pine only. Okay, so now we do have some prescriptive provisions we can use for your single ply beams. So a single 2x6, 2x8, 10 or 12. This will give you a little bit more flexibility for some of those smaller decks. Section R703.2 removes the exception for weather barrier on accessory buildings. So your sheds and your detached garages and buildings such as those need to have your water resistant barrier, your building wrap, or whatever you prefer to use within the parameters of the code. That'll need to be on your accessory buildings now. The idea being that framing members of accessory buildings get exposed to weather just like everything else. They're going to suffer damage just like anything else. Okay, section R1005.8 adds a requirement for factory-built chimneys to have an insulation shield where it passes through an insulated assembly. So where it passes through that insulation, it needs to be fitted with an insulation shield, minimum 26 gauge steel, and it needs to maintain clearance to the insulation according to the manufacturer's specifications of clearance to combustibles. Okay, so you'll find that in your specs. Keep that, make sure that shield's big enough to keep it away from the insulation. Section M1305.1.3.2 has provided some additional details for installing appliances in pits. We see these in crawl spaces a fair amount. This particular picture is a water heater that was installed in a crawl space, and they just kind of dig a pit down, get a pad in there and put the water heater on that pad. We won't talk about how this one doesn't exactly comply. I can see the inspectors getting antsy in the corner. It was hard to find a picture of this in compliance. There's a lot of pictures of how these don't comply. So this is what we have. But in that section, you'll find the parameters for how, if you're going to do this type of installation, how that needs to be done. Section M1603.6 modifies when makeup air is required for kitchen exhaust. This is a good one. Makeup air is now only required where there are one or more appliances that are not direct vent or mechanical draft within the air barrier, and the makeup air is capable of exhausting in excess of 400 CFM. Had to make sure I wrote that right. So where you're building new houses and all of your appliances are direct vent or mechanical draft, go nuts and install those big hoods. We don't need makeup air for those anymore. Okay, section G2447.2 now allows commercial appliances to be installed in residential kitchens. However, they need to be installed according to an engineered design. So you can now tell your customers they can get their big fancy commercial stoves installed. However, we need an engineered design and they need to be installed in accordance with manufacturer specifications. So make sure you pay attention to those before you buy it. Make sure that's what you want to install. But you can now, we now have parameters to allow that. Section P2713.1 deletes the requirement for bathtub overflow outlets. And I just checked the 18 IPC. It does not delete it in there. So in your commercial applications, still required. But projects built under the IRC, our bathtub overflow outlets, are now optional. Section P2801.6 now allows plastic pans under water heaters. These plastic pans were previously allowed under electric, but now they're allowed under gas and electric water heaters. But the plastic pan has to meet the flame and smoke spread indexes, so 25 and 450 respectively. And there are some products on the market now that meet this. This is obviously not my garage, because I would never own golf clubs, but. Section E3703.5 now requires a separate circuit for garage receptacles. So this is a separate 20 amp circuit specific to serving receptacles in attached garages and any detached garages that have been provided with power. Okay, section E3901.9 clarifies garage receptacle locations. So a receptacle has to be located in each vehicle bay of the garage. Okay, so if I have a 3-car garage, you can't just put 3 over on one wall. I need 1 in each bay. Section E3902.4 requires GFCI protection for crawl space lights now. Okay, due to low headroom and the damp location. That's why we're doing that. We want to get those lighting outlets protected in the crawl space so they can go on that same circuit as any outlets down there, but it needs to be on GFCI. Appendix Q, we adopted Appendix Q. This covers requirements for tiny houses. I don't know if anybody's doing tiny houses, but they're a trend that doesn't seem to be going away, so the code has now dealt with them. The appendix includes alternate provisions for ceiling heights, lofts, stairs, guards, and egress openings. So those egress openings now have a provision for those roof hatches, egress roof hatch, out of those sleeping lofts.
Going back to the clearance requirements for PV systems on roofs.
Yes.
Did you say that the new requirements in the code are the same as what PFA has already had in place, or different?
They're the same as the 2018 IFC, and as of the date of writing this, the 2018 IFC amendment adoption was not final, so I'm not sure what PFA is doing with that, but I don't expect any changes in those clearances.
Okay.
So we've been enforcing those on our review side.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. So next I'm going to introduce Shar and Casey, and they're going to go over contractor licensing. So come on up, Shar, Casey. Thank you.
Woohoo! 3 slides and done, everyone. How about that? So close. All right, my name is Shar Gerber, and I've got Casey going up the stairs here. She can introduce herself.
I'm Casey Scheidenhelm.
We're going to go over just a couple of things. Russ said you got 10 minutes, and I said, sure, we can shove that into 3 slides for all of contractor licensing. So a couple of the things that we wanted to go over is some of the things that we have noticed the most on some of the paperwork that's coming in and questions and confusion that people have had. So differences that we're finding, especially on the paperwork in getting the correct application into your folders, is between general contractors, subcontractors, and exempt. So general contractors, as we view it, and this is probably way oversimplified, is general contractors, they build the structures. Subcontractors, they're going to make sure that the buildings are stuffed full of stuff, have the roofs on, and any solar panels, anything like that. So they fill the buildings. And then the exempt workers are basically additional staff that subcontractors can use. So general contractors, you all can build with your crews. A lot of the stuff you can do on your own with your own employees. Subcontractors, you get hired by the general contractors to come in and do the work that they need you to do. And then the exempt workers, you all are the individuals that are hired by the subcontractors, not as employees, but you are able to work underneath that license with the subcontractor being your on-site supervisor. So the subcontractors have, especially like with roofing crews, a lot of them only have a couple people on staff and they need more help, so they can hire other individuals as the registered exempt workers to come in and help them get their jobs done. They will come in and register as exempt. It's a 1-page form that they will fill out. They're going to provide their general liability, workman's comp insurance. It is $200 for 2 years. It's a biannual license for any one of the registrations or licenses. And then they'll work under you. So if you are the on-site supervisor for your company, you're going to supervise all of the individuals on that site that are registered. Okay? All right. So finding some of this information, where to go, and then renewal versus reinstatements. So really, a couple clicks away, you're going to enter www.fcgov.com. Once you get there, this will take you to the main City of Fort Collins webpage. You're going to go to this 3rd column, view/find, under building permits. And then that will bring you to building services. So anything that everyone has talked about this morning, you're going to find on this particular building services webpage. Any of the code sections you need, all the forms, building permit information. But if you scroll down, and sorry, I don't have a mouse up here, you can scroll down, center of page, become a licensed contractor, and click right there. So just a couple of clicks. That's going to take you to the contractor licensing homepage. We're in the process of finishing up a lean process on the entire contractor licensing program, so you're going to see some changes that we've made. We're also trying to lean it out a little bit so it's a little bit easier for you all and for us to get this done in a more timely manner. I am going to hand it over to Casey. She's going to kind of go through what's on our website and some sources.
Thank you. All right, so given our crew today, I'm going to focus on renewals and reinstatements. If you scroll right down here, you will see a section right here for new licenses and registration. Okay, so if that is needed, please let us know. We're happy to answer any questions you have. But if you keep going down a little bit further, you will find renewals and reinstatements. Now, we have a few tabs. We've got general, we've got specialized trade, master electrician and plumber, and exempt right here. I'm going to go into general contractor just to show you an example. So this renewal packet is a PDF. It is one file with all the documents you need. The very first page is our checklist. This is what we go by. The darker blue, and the colors aren't showing up super well here, but you can see it better on your personal computer. The darker blue boxes are things you do not need. The lighter boxes are things you do need. And there is a key right up here. Reinstatements is the RI column, so the second column. Renewals is the RN column, which is the third column. Now, what is the difference between a reinstatement and a renewal? Renewals are anything within 60 days of your expiration, okay? Then that is still considered a renewal. If you are past that, 60-day grace, then you are in a reinstatement, okay? What are the differences between a renewal and a reinstatement? There are two differences as far as requirements go. One is a $75 application fee, okay? The second one, which is much more important to most people, is the ICC national exam, all right? Unless you really like taking exams, if so, more power to you. But for most people, they don't want to retake that exam. We do have to go by current standards for exams, okay? Currently, because ICC has not come out with the 2018 testing, we are still accepting the 2015 and the 2012. If your testing is prior to that and you are in a reinstatement period, then you need new testing in order to reinstate your license, okay? So please keep that in mind. We do send you a letter about 2 months prior to your expiration, reminding you that that is happening. Those letters are computer generated. We are trying desperately to update those. This is a more exact version of what you need for a reinstatement and a renewal than that letter that you get, okay? So please reference our website, all right? Just a couple other highlights of things that we see often that are needed. Please make sure that your packet is complete. A complete packet is everything that is listed on this checklist. It does include your certificate of insurance, all right? Please don't have your insurance agent be sending that separately as a one-pager. We receive dozens of those certificates every single day, and they are processed much differently than these packets. We need a copy of that certificate of insurance with your packet in order to process it, okay? Some other things that we see, incomplete packets will be returned to you if they are not complete, so please make sure that they are. After we receive a completed packet, it can take up to 2 weeks for a turnaround, okay? So please don't come in the day before and hand it to us and expect it to be automatic, immediate. You can submit all of these documents to us via email. There's an email address here, contractor_licensing@fcgov.com. There's also a phone number up here in the top right corner. Both of those go to Shar and myself to help answer questions and receive your documents, okay? If we have any questions about your application packet and when everything is renewed and reinstated, we are going to contact you via the email address that is on your application. So please make sure that it is legible. Please make sure that you're checking that email address too, because everybody wants to receive that email that says, hey, you can pull permits now. All right? Other than that, one other thing before I get out of here. On the second page is going to be your application. And you will see, because we are in the general contractor's application, it lists all the license types here, okay? You're not going to see HVAC and solar and other things on this page because that was the specialized trade application, okay? So that's how you know you're filling out the right form right off the bat.
So Class B will allow you to go up to 5 stories in height. Class A is our unlimited license, which brings you past that 5 stories. So in order to upgrade your license, and this is for any license out there, you'll need to provide the 3 project verifications showing that you have the experience to build above 5 stories. So you'll need to provide 3 buildings above 5 stories and then submit those to us so that we can take a look at them real quick and then do the upgrade on the license. And you can do that at any time, whenever you're ready.
Does it matter where?
No, it does not matter where. We actually had a project that was permitted from Dubai. So that makes a verification call challenging in itself, but actually kind of cool. So we'll take them from anywhere. Preferably not here, because then I'll have a whole bunch of questions to ask you if you're already building those here. So it happens.
I'm hearing the subcontractors, the contractor, subcontractor, and exempt.
Yes.
Are we getting rid of the supervisor certificate then?
No, the supervisor certificate and the license go hand in hand. So the license, as Casey and I describe it, the license basically belongs to the company. Anyone can hold the license for your company. The supervisor certificate, or the on-site supervisor certificate, that is held by the individual who has submitted the testing and the project verifications as an on-site supervisor. So when we're doing the project verifications, we are asking questions to those individuals. Basically, what role did this individual play on the project? Were they supervising? Were they the office individual, the salesperson? What did that look like? Because we need to verify that whoever's on site is the one who has done the testing and has the knowledge to be on site running those crews. And that actually will travel with the individual. So if an individual has their certificate and they change companies or whatever that may look like for them, they can keep that certificate with them. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. If Russ has anything more to add, I'll let him.
Wanted to add quickly that going forward for future code adoptions, the plan right now is that we will be adopting the codes every 3 years as a year after the issuance. So it would be 12 months within issuance, so it'll be every 3 years. And so that means in 2 years we'll start the next code adoption committee. And for any of you that are interested, I would love to have you sit on that committee. We want as many people as possible to review the codes and make recommended changes for adoption. And so in 2 years we'll be starting that process again. And then with that, I wanted to thank everybody for coming. I really appreciate it, and have a great day.